thank you for being here. And I think some of the things, I unfortunately was not able to be here yesterday, but a lot of the things even in that last talk by Joe, I think are going to resonate. And I think why I was asked to speak today was to give you sort of an update perhaps on what's going on in the landscape of Time's Up healthcare. So what happened in 2017 that's relevant to this talk? Me too, right? So that was a very easy, it's top of mind. And it really did change the landscape. And if I can convey anything else today to you leaders at your healthcare organizations, is that we have to face it, because things really are different, and things that were okay, not really okay, but were really tolerated and felt to be a part of being in a healthcare world, or a part of being in our world, are not okay, and in fact shouldn't have ever been. And I think that's the point I'd like to make. And I'm specifically going to talk about just framing the issue, telling you a little bit about Time's Up Healthcare, the organization, and then Jan and I are going to have a conversation about what this might mean in your organizations. So I think one of the things is we talk about the women, 70+% of healthcare workers are women, but they don't land in leadership. And one could argue that more women in leadership, there's lots of data, that their leadership styles may be something that could help us with this big, gnarly problem of healthcare. There are a few studies that would even show that patient outcomes might be better. There's some studies about hospitalists and Medicare patients. There's studies about emergency room doctors and heart attack patients, where women did better and men did better under the care of women. I say may because these are all of these, but I'm setting the stage as this is not just so what. There might actually be something to having women have more of a voice and be more in leadership. So what is at least one of the problems? Well, what is this? This textbook was published in 2019. The black and white photos were the second edition, and they were asked to do something better about showing the photographs for the third edition. The color photographs, this is how to do an orthopedic exam. When this was tweeted, this is how I saw it, I said, well, I'm not going to retweet because I only check and verify. Actually, the publisher, Cambridge Press, these were pictures that were available on the website that I pulled down. So that is part of the problem. Now, Cambridge Press has pulled that from distribution after a Twitter storm that said, how dare you? But I think that those kinds of things, the fact that in 2019 a book could go on sale that looked like that, is emblematic of where we sit. So in 2018, many of you, and I would encourage you, if you are not familiar with the NASM report, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, about sexual harassment. It's about a 300-page report, but there's about 10 pages with recommendations for action plan that are really relevant to virtually all of us. Some focus a little bit more on academic medical centers or or STEM, but I think if I had to, there's several things that could really help you. One, and I'm going to share with you the definitions. So what are we talking about when we talk about sexual harassment, gender harassment, sexual coercion, discrimination? And I think the finding that is well referenced, as you might imagine, something that comes from NASM, is that it is the climate of our organizations that is the most predictive of whether this behavior occurs. I'm going to show you some other things. So it is the climate in which we work. So definition-wise, so a lot of people, when they're thinking Me Too, they think Harvey Weinberg, they think about the worst things. And I think that the point that the NASM report makes is what's above that sexual coercion. You know, I'll let you be an author on a paper if you do this and research, or, you know, I'll give you a promotion, I'll write you a good recommendation. That's that sexual coercion. Then the unwanted sexual attention, you know, that goes anywhere from repeated asking for dates or that are rejected to sexual assault or groping. And then there's that whole gender harassment, and that gets back to, you know, the book. It's talking about sex at work, showing pictures, going into the restroom at work and seeing, you know, for a good time, call. The other things that I think are really relevant for healthcare, and I've certainly heard it, is where there's actually either ignoring individuals, which in healthcare, when every member of the team may have something important to bring to our patient care, or even destroying or interfering with the work of an individual because you're mad, or because it's a girl, or because you think it's funny. And these are all of things that make a workplace unsafe, hostile, and undignified. So I want to talk about, because as all of this blowback from Me Too, there is, particularly in healthcare, is some myths or things that have been said in the past. So harassment is just a minority issue. It's affecting a few overly sensitive women who are generally unfit for work. And I think that this is from the NASM report, which showed that this starts early in healthcare. So if you look at this, female medical students, about half of them experienced some type of sexist hostility or gender harassment as students. And that is higher than female engineering students and undergraduates. That's just part of the culture. I'm going to show you some studies. There were 4 studies that were published in the last month on this, one on Monday. So they're not the prettiest slides because I just pulled them. But in this study of surgical residents, and men and women at the end of their training exam were asked a number of questions. But 70% of the women reported mistreatment. Now this included gender harassment and broke it down. And that was significantly more than men, but men experienced it as well. In this study from Massachusetts General Hospital, where they looked at residents in surgery, medicine, and anesthesia, both men and women, I think the important thing from this study is, one, it's really pervasive, men and women, and look who's doing it. Nursing's number 1, and patients and visitors are 2 and 3. So we're not going to talk about patients as perpetrators today, but they are part of the problem that makes our workplace hostile. So if harassment is indeed identified, these perpetrators, they must be rotten apples. We just have to get them out, and then we'll be good. But remember what the NASM report said, it is the climate in which we work. So this was published on Monday, which I apologize, but University of Michigan, who surveyed all of their faculty, and this is basic science as well as clinical. They had only about a 25% response rate. I think that's where, but I think what is striking, so the graph on the left is men and women experiencing gender harassment, which is that's the most common, but actually some sexual coercion and unwanted sexual attention. Men and women. The first set of graphs is from colleagues, and the other set of graphs on the right is from patients or visitors, so people outside of the organization. So this is pervasive, and it's interesting, they comment on how prevalent this was for men, because they were very specific in the questionnaires and saying it was unwanted. And I think what it speaks to, the men weren't particularly interested in hearing those dirty jokes or seeing that in their workplace either. I think that's really important in these discussions. It is not a we, they. This is not a culture that most of our male colleagues like either. The other is that harassment doesn't cause physical or psychological harm, so it's not a priority. Well, we know that after Me Too, that's really not the case. But we have data. So from that University of Michigan study, those individuals who endorsed that they had experienced unwanted sexual harassment actually endorsed that they had lower levels of mental health, job satisfaction, and a sense of safety, and were more likely to leave the organization. These are K awardees. So for those of you in academic medical centers, you know that those are your gems. These are young people who have managed to get NIH funding and are on their way to getting federal funding for their research. So we want to support them. But if you look at those very vulnerable, because those are early career, they're experiencing a large amount of coercion, they're very vulnerable, and almost 60% felt like it decreased their confidence, and about half said they negatively affected their career advancement, meaning they might not seek to get that R01 that would bring money to our organizations. So I think reflecting on those data, and then thinking about how if you're in that workplace for which you were exposed to this, whether you were a man or a woman, but if you are a woman, you're far more likely to be a target, that physically we know that there are things, as a physician, we know that this stress causes high blood pressure, high levels of cortisol. It's not good for you. Can't sleep, emotionally. And then think about that employee's willingness to do the things that we are charged to do in healthcare, whether that is to learn as students, to teach as faculty, to lead, to care for others, which is kind of what we're all about, and actually to stay on our workplace. I think the important thing is this isn't a minority problem because it affects everyone on the team. And in fact, several of those studies I showed actually asked about how you felt as a witness to this behavior. And people get moral distress, they gain cynicism, they really don't feel well. So if you work in an environment where you know this is happening, even if it's not happening to you, it is detrimental to that organization. So I think framing sexual harassment and gender discrimination as an occupational hazard that's analogous to other workforce dangers. The NASM report frames this in terms of research as research misconduct, and there are some proposals at the NIH to actually say that this could be just like research misconduct in other areas where you falsify data, that this could lead to falsification of data, it is misconduct, and can lead to adverse patient outcomes. So Freud, the great question, which I've not been able to answer despite my 30 years of research into the feminine soul, what does a woman want? Well, I think most women want equity. And so I think that is a, I'm not gonna go where Freud was probably gonna go, but I think that it's really important to realize a lot of the conversations that we're talking about is equity. We talk about health equity. We talk about equity. You guys, I saw your program. You're talking about equity a lot on multiple levels. And that really is, and so the environments in which sexual harassment and gender discrimination occur tend to have broad ranges of other inequities, such as inequities in compensation, inequities in leadership opportunities, and in promotion. And that was very prevalent in those organizations that had the highest levels. So we know that among physicians, and I realize this is a little bit physician heavy, but that's where a lot of the data comes from, but there has not been one study yet that has been published that has shown that there is gender pay equity. And in fact, in the first year out of residency, women in the same specialty, doing the same amount of work, make less than men. So it's out of the gate. And you say, oh, that's just doctors, which is a male-dominated field? No, it happens in nursing as well. So men are the minority in nursing, but on average, make more money. So salary inequity is a real thing. So I would argue that women are doing their part and structural change is really necessary. So Time's Up Healthcare, which was launched in March of this year, was formed to address some of these issues and to be a voice for change as well as a resource. So looking at this is not this isn't a bad apple in your organization. This is healthcare writ large, and how can we, as people who care about healthcare, who care about equity, who care about our people, change the narrative? Because it really is, if you think about it, a cancer on our profession. So this is a group I want to tell you a little bit about Time's Up Healthcare. So there are 7 steering committee members and 50 founders. 50 founders are a very diverse group. Little physician heavy, but we have broad race, ethnicity, and gender diversity. We're very deliberate about including LGBTQ people. One of the steering committee members is a trans woman. We have role diversity, so it's everything from medical students to very senior people, and one who is recently retired after, and broad geographic. I would put a plea here because we are looking for additional people to be involved, particularly non-physicians. We are not looking for any more physicians, but leaders and others. We have PAs and nursing and others, but this group represents home health workers. And if you think about who is some of the most vulnerable people to this kind of abuse, this is healthcare writ large. It isn't just a bunch of doctors and nurses who work at academic medical centers. We're also looking for signatories, and one of the things I'm very proud of is that Mayo was a signatory, and people say, well, what does that mean? Well, basically, what it means is we say, we don't commit to Time's Up Healthcare, but what we say as an organization is sexual harassment and gender discrimination have no place in healthcare. We're going to commit to supporting routing it out, supporting the victims. We're going to commit to trying to get to pay equity and other types of equity in our organization, and that we are going to measure and track sexual harassment at our organization. The reason it was a little easier for us to sign is we actually started doing all of these in 2017, including tracking and doing a new process for addressing sexual harassment. So we realized with the Me Too, this is at Mayo Clinic, that we did not have a central, we have 68,000 employees, and things were happening a little bit differently depending on your role, your site. And so we made sure that that was centralized and there is a team that addresses it all, and that's a whole nother talk. So in summary, this is really all of our problem. It's a problem for everyone. It's bad for women. It's really bad for the healthcare team because there is moral distress if you see it on your team and you don't do anything about it. It's bad for business. It's bad for our patients. I sometimes like to stream RBG. So I would ask all of you to think about how this may play out in your organizations. And also because the main goal, if you look at the Time's Up Healthcare website, is we're looking for safe, equitable, and dignified workplace for all people in healthcare, whether you're a hospital, a nursing home, or somebody who goes into the home. So with that, I will sit down with Jan and answer your questions and hers.
Wow, so fabulous work, Dr. Hayes. And I do have a couple of questions that I think the audience would be interested in, and then we'll take some questions from the audience as well. But first of all, why now? Why is the movement important now?
Well, I think healthcare likes to think of themselves as leaders, and with Me Too, we couldn't ignore that we had a problem. And I think that the now is we have a national attention on the issue, and if healthcare doesn't deal with their own house, we're in trouble. And two, we have some really good evidence and data now with the NASM report that allows us to do things that are very actionable. And I think Time's Up Healthcare came in there, which is a way to put a laser focus on our organizations and industry.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, when speaking of sexual harassment, specifically in the workplace and out in the world, oftentimes I come across the question of, can women go too far? You know, what's reasonable?
I think that's a great question. And I think as hard as it is, I think for all of us to grapple with is the bar has changed. And so I don't think it's a question of women going too far. It is mostly what was okay 20 years ago or 40 years ago or even 3 years ago is something that there is this, we're not going to take it anymore. So yes, there are rare false claims, and when it comes down to it, it becomes a he said, she said. But at least in our experience and in other organizations, the vast majority of these claims and accusations are not only true, they've been going on for decades and ignored. So I think it's less about women going too far, is all of us recognizing that what we did and what we tolerated for years is just not okay. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't want it for our daughters.
Absolutely. So on one of the last slides that you had, you mentioned what we can do as organizations, and I can speak for myself as an HR professional and spent many years doing investigations around sexual harassment. It often does come up to be he said, she said. What can we do as organizations to really get into the crust of what happens with sexual harassment and take a position for our organizations that are better for our employees?
So I can speak to, I do think that there are resources and being a part of Time's Up Healthcare can be helpful. But I'll tell you what Mayo has done, because we realized we were caught a little bit flat-footed, and we realized we had great people, but we didn't have as good a system. So one of the things we did is we refreshed our policy, and it's actually not a sexual harassment, it's sexual and other harassment, so it encompasses all of the things that might happen in a workplace. We actually have a dedicated team, so this isn't just whoever's on call in HR or legal for the day. We actually have upskilled a team, a multidisciplinary team to evaluate these things. We also, so we keep track of it, we have a monthly dashboard of numbers of claims, how long they take, so it's got multiple. So I think getting your house in order so you can measure what's happening and know that each decision that is being made. What we found is by doing that, our employees do not feel like it is a witch hunt, right? Because one of the concerns would be, oh no, now they're out to, there'll be all these false claims and it's always going to side with the woman or the women, it's both ways. It's like there's going to be a false claims and a bunch of men's careers are going to go down. And women who were very cynical because they had seen behavior go on for a decade that had never been addressed or even reported, so why would I bother reporting it? So that transparency to our employees and having very clear, whether it's coaching or a written report or termination. And the one thing I will say we found is, and we keep track of who are the perpetrators, a couple of high-level things. So about 2/3 of the accusations are substantiated. I use the term substantiated because that doesn't mean it was a false claim if it wasn't. Some of them were just misunderstanding. But some of them were really he said, she said. And if that's all we have, we don't take it any further. But obviously it's something that is on record. Male physicians are 50 times more likely to be the perpetrator than any other role at our organization. So even though the numbers aren't that large because we have far fewer physicians than we have. So now that has allowed it by having the data to provide additional training, coaching, and other things, and attention to that. So we're now reaping the benefits of putting this into place in 2017.
Awesome. So you just mentioned that male perpetrators are 50% more likely.
50 times.
50 times more likely
Yes.
to be the perpetrator. What about the flip side of that, and that would be woman against male in the workplace?
So that's all covered by our policy. It has been reported very infrequently out of the several, couple hundred cases that we've been tracking, it's like 2. But it happens, and I think it's really important. But it's also probably important not to overemphasize that kind of thing because the data would suggest it is predominantly. And if you think about it in healthcare, so much of it is about the power differential. The doctor or the nurse, the doctor and the learner. And so the positions and those that we have seen where it has been a woman, it's typically been somebody who is in power. It has been a supervisor, it's been a leader, it has been a physician.
Awesome. And oftentimes we never hear about same-sex harassment. How prevalent is that in the workplace?
I think we don't have very good data, honestly, because it isn't something that it's probably even more underreported, but obviously very important. And I think we talk about this in Time's Up Healthcare is so much of the data and the conversation is around heteronormative and heterosexual interactions, but particularly when there are power differentials, we need to be open to, and that's why our policy is sexual and other harassment, just to make sure that we can address all of them.
And due to this phenomenon with Me Too and now Time's Up and the attention that this has, do you feel as if in some way we have silenced men because men feel as if they don't have an avenue for an organization or anything to stand up for them?
Yeah, I think that is the conversation as a director for diversity and inclusion for all 68,000 of my employees, is really listening to men, because men are, we know they're more likely to be the problem, and often because of positions of power, but they are also the key to the solution, because what we are seeing from some of the data is men don't like this environment either. And so rather than silencing them, is engaging them and teaching them how, in that really uncomfortable situation, when something has just been said or done that they see or hear about, that they are empowered as upstanders to be able to sort of support the victim or report or sort of change the culture. And I think that's really the path forward, is engaging men as allies and upstanders and bystanders. I think that the flip side that we've seen, and you know, you can read about it in Harvard Business Review, but I'm hearing it from colleagues, is the men who say, well, because of Me Too, I'm afraid to mentor a woman. I'm not going to mentor a woman, or I'm cautious about that, or I'm not comfortable. And I think that handling those conversations in an empathetic but firm way. So what we know is that women and minorities, regardless of industry, have less access to mentors and sponsors, and even the informal, you know, how do you do the job, the informal curriculum at our organizations. So this has the potential to make that gap even greater. So when I have, particularly a faculty member, we are a teaching organization, say, you know, I'm not going to mentor women, or, you know, I'm not going to mentor women in my office. I'm going to do it in the cafeteria. And first of all, I have a conversation and express my empathy for how they're feeling, because there's a lot going on outside. But I also am firm that that is part of their job. I mean, if you are, that is a core job. And if they're going to make rules about where and when they meet, then they have to be applied equally. So if they won't meet with a woman alone, they cannot meet with a man alone. And and a lot of times there's a light bulb that goes on, because they're in this place of fear, but when they realize, because most of my colleagues are great, they are not, you know, but this is where they are in their head, is they're fearful, is helping them see how that could disadvantage the very people that they have come into, you know, this work to help. And that, yes, if they really are still fearful, they need to meet with the men in the cafeteria too, to keep the playing field level.
Can you share any personal experiences that you may have that have fueled your passion?
Well, you know, I'm a cardiologist, and when I went into becoming a cardiologist, there were only 6% of cardiologists. And so I've been an only for a long time. And I think early on, when I was young and didn't have gray hair, a lot of it was the gender discrimination, the unwanted sexual comments, and some of them were you can think benign, but aren't you a pretty little girl? You just look like my grandmother. You're way too young to be a doctor or a cardiologist. And those things do get to you. I reflected only, but a more serious one, and you and I talked about this earlier, but while I was in medical school, I was on a surgical rotation. And the senior resident, who had let me do more procedures than the average medical school, you know, I was really excited. It was an exciting rotation. I really enjoyed it. And he asked me out for a date, but he didn't take me out. He took me to his apartment where we watched opera. And then he came on to me, and I, at the time, was acutely uncomfortable. And really, and it was one of those things that I had put back a long time ago, because, and then with this conversation, I was a third-year medical student. Here was a guy who was going to write my evaluation. I did not think about those things at that time. I thought about, well, I was scared. But those are the kinds of things that no student or resident or staff member should have to face today.
Thank you for that. In addition to that, are there times when acts of harassment can be consensual and later viewed as harassment?
Yeah, yes, I would say harassment shouldn't be consensual, but a relationship, I mean, there's some wrong there, but But relationships can be consensual, obviously, particularly in the workplace, and then one party has decided the relationship is over and the other perhaps is persistently, we actually have one of our scenarios for teaching our staff is exactly that. It's a couple that broke up, that were going out together, consensual. We actually, as part of this, put a new policy in on relationships in the workplace. We do not, unlike McDonald's, we do not prohibit them. I mean, Rochester, Minnesota is a small town, and if we said no one could, we got 42,000 employees, and if none of them could date, I'm married to a cardiologist at Mayo Clinic, so I'd be in violation. So that is not the case, but in cases in which there might be a conflict, we ask that they declare it. And this is a relatively new policy. We had some guidelines for just how to manage it, but this puts in place, we have who to report it to, and then it's actively managed. So if there appears to be somebody who's going to get, their performance evaluations, we talk about how that's going to be managed or whether it might be appropriate for somebody to move to a different work area. So I do think having those conversations, because a number of the cases that we have evaluated since 2017 do have to do with previously, if not consensual harassment, consensual relationships that went bad.
Mm-hmm. So what should we do in the workplace if we're experiencing situations where there's that leader that may wink at you or may come over to you and gently give you a massage or actions that you know may not be appropriate but are not aggressive?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, there's a couple of things. I think women and men should be prepared because it's likely to happen, and so be comfortable saying, that doesn't make me comfortable, please stop. But I think everyone who is a leader in this organization needs to go back and see, what is your policy? What would you tell your employee who had that, particularly if it was not stopped in the moment? And what avenues does he or she have to report, and how, if reported, is it acted upon? Because I think that would be, obviously I can counsel how an individual in that moment might react, but if it is a repeated offense, that individual in your organization needs to know that it will be taken seriously, and because that behavior makes it very hard to do your job.
Absolutely. And lastly, just our last question for the audience, can you once again give us information on your organization and how their organizations can be a part of the movement?
Yeah, so go on the website, timesuphealthcare.org. If your CEO would be interested in being a signatory, we did have a goal of having 100 signatories by the end of the year. We're probably going to be at about 65. I'm not expecting everyone in here in the next 3 weeks to get to that. But I do think it sends a powerful message, and if you look at the types of organizations that have signed on, it is everything from private practices to nursing organizations to academic medical centers, and so I do think history will tell us that it's probably the side of history that we want to be on.
Awesome. So now we'll take questions from the audience, if there are any. We have a mic in the back. Oh, and right there. Questions?
Yep, there's
okay.
one.
Here's one in the middle. Love the bow tie, by the way.
Oh, thank you. My question is, how can not only Time's Up Healthcare, but individuals in the room recognize the intersections of sexual harassment, mainly how the Me Too movement being started by Tarana Burke, primarily addressing what women of color and black women were facing? Are there ways that your organization has looked at the intricacies of discussing openly with people the different levels of harassment people may face because of other identities?
Yeah, that's actually was very intentional in the group of founders, and the list of founders is on the website that I think, because recognizing particularly LGBTQ and particularly trans women are among those who are most likely to experience not just sexual harassment, just harassment and violence in general. And that women of color in particular, among the founders, it is, I'm a white woman sitting here talking about this, but I will tell you, we are very clear, among each other, among the founders, is we don't need more white women here. We need to continue. Well, obviously, we need every white woman to be working on this. But in terms of the face of leadership, and one of the things we talked about quite a bit, because when Time's Up writ large came about, it was a bunch of rich actresses, right, who came forward. Important, true, good work, and but they were criticized. Well, like, why are you whining because you're all rich actresses? And their response was to shine a big light on farm workers and people who. So I do think we take very seriously the privilege that those of us have to be able to shine lights on the intersectionality and the higher rates of harassment and discrimination that is experienced by non-white women, cisgender women.
Thank you for this critical work.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any more questions from the audience? Right over here.
Thank you again. Pay inequity. In your collaboration with various organizations throughout the country, any best practice that you would recommend in terms of approach?
Yeah, so it will sound a bit self-serving. I'm not an author on the paper, but I'm really proud of my own professional organization, American College of Cardiology, which about a month ago, it's mainly focused on physicians, so it's RVU-based and other things, but came out with 14 points that organizations and individuals should be looking at and put into place to achieve pay equity. You could apply this to really any profession, particularly physicians. And a lot of it has to do with pay transparency. Some of you may have seen the push and even legislation to require organizations to share pay. I don't know that that's going to go anywhere, but one of the biggest he for she things that men can do in an organization is tell women what they make, because often it is more than somebody doing the same job who is a woman. I will say that traditional ways in which, particularly academic medicine, but the business of medicine is, there may be a salary. A lot of these are public institutions, so the base salary is actually posted on their website. If you're University of Minnesota, you've got the salaries. But there's all these side deals. There's bonuses, there's incentive pay, there are the other things that are coming out, and often those are very unequally distributed. We actually do have pay equity at Mayo Clinic, and the manuscript reporting that will come out in January. I had a really hard time even getting it published because nobody believed that it was possible. And we have a very unique pay model. We're salary only. I make the same as any other non-invasive cardiologist, male or female, and we actually got an external firm to Willis Towers Watson to do this because we'd been reporting pay equity. And I think that because of the widespread number of reports of pay inequity, we felt like it was really important to push it out. The issue has got to be for pay equity is we have to believe it's important, and I think a lot of people don't think it. They just think, well, he must work harder, or he negotiated better, but often it has nothing to do with negotiation. It's actually men being offered more money at the start, and it goes back to when men, he's more deserving because he's got a family. An awful lot of my female physician colleagues are the breadwinner. They have a stay-at-home dad. And so that whole thing disadvantages their whole family and the community by not paying them equitably. So pay equity is you will see Time's Up Healthcare, that is, and they've gone, for the soccer players, for the farm workers, that is one of those great equalizers. And when we talk about safety, dignity, and equity, pay equity and compensation equity is a big part of this.
Awesome. So it sounds like for organizations, they need to be very intentional.
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes. Any more questions in the audience? All righty, well, we'll go ahead and wrap up. If we could give another round of applause for Dr. Hayes. Thank you very much.
For the very intentional questions. Dr. Hayes, thank you for
debunking the myths, talking of the impacts both clinically from a research standpoint, personal, business, etc., and then sharing some solutions with us on a very, very, as was said in the audience, a very, very important topic, very important work. So, all right, we're going to move on to our next part of the morning. I'm particularly excited about this part of the program that we have entitled Power Sessions. This is where you, the participant, get to choose what you're going to do and where you're going to spend your time. So allow me just to describe just a bit. And while I'm describing, I am going to ask the speakers for the next sessions, plural, to come up to the stage so that you can introduce yourselves and the topic that you'll be talking about. So, come on up. All right, terrific. Come on up, come on. Don't be shy, don't be shy. Come on up. And then if we could get one of the microphones up here too, that would be fantastic. So here's what's going to happen. If you check out your programs on page 2, what you all see are 2 sessions. Session 1 will be in the Avenue Ballroom. Session 2 will be in the Streeterville Ballroom. Starting at 9:45 will be Session A. Starting at 10:20 will be Session B. And then starting at 10:55 will be Session C. What we're going to do is just have the presenters give a brief, very, very brief highlight of their session, so you get the opportunity to choose which one you're going to participate in, and then have the opportunity to hear that discussion and manage your time accordingly. After they describe what their talk is about, we are going to take a break till 9:45, when the first session will begin. So let's see if we can get one of those microphones up here. Terrific. All right, so if you guys wouldn't mind, just your name and then the session that you'll be providing.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Cynthia Barganier, and I am at Rush University System for Health, and I am the System Transformation Officer for our organization. My presentation is a partnership with the team at Integrity, and we will be talking about the model that Integrity has developed using complexity science to help organizations to create a strategic plan that brings many, many voices to the table and helps you to create a vision and actions for your aspirations. And so for me, it was one of the most unconventional and exciting and engaging processes that we had undergone at Rush. And so I'm excited to partner with David in being able to show you guys a little bit, give you a little insight into how that process worked and the outcomes for us at Rush.
So that's session 2C. That's the 10:55 time slot in the Streeterville Ballroom. Thank you.
Good morning. I am Constance Spade from Cone Health in Greensboro, North Carolina. In my session today, Dr. Bruce Woods and I will partner and talk to you and actually share our journey as it relates to our Physician Leadership Academy. How we move from competition to collaboration, realizing that we're all working together, maybe doing a little different, but how we're going to meet that same goal and ensure that we're taking care of our patients and our community.
Terrific. So that's session 1C. So we've got some competition between rooms here. This is all good. It's all healthy. Terrific. And that'll be the 10:55 time slot in the Avenue Ballroom. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chris Newell. I'm the Senior Director of Learning Development for Boston Children's Hospital. My talk really is about the story of one executive, well, let me back up. So even though Children's is renowned for its clinical and research and whatever, not so much renowned for its culture in some ways. So the talk really is about how do you set the reset button? How do you hit the reset button around some things that are pretty ingrained in a 150-year-old organization? And then how does it, I'm going to focus on one executive who kind of took it on. And from a practitioner standpoint, how do we play our role to support someone like that to try to make a change? So it's really the journey, get under the hood a little bit and talk with you very specifically about what we tried and where we are.
All right, terrific. And that's session 1A, 9:45, Avenue Ballroom.
Good morning. I'm Eric Bosigal. I'm the Vice President for Organizational Effectiveness, Learning, and Development for Henry Ford Health System in Detroit. And my session is going to be focusing on the journey that we took with regard to the performance appraisal or performance management system that we redesigned. Specifically, I think it'll probably sound familiar. We were unimpressed with the results that we were getting and the experience that our workforce was having, and we wanted to try to transform it into an event that was less of checking a box and more into a real dialogue that was meaningful and bringing value not only to the organization but to the employee. One of the things that we did is we eliminated a rating system from the process and completely redesigned the way in which we did it from the very beginning to the end. And so I'll be talking a little bit about the journey that we took and basically what we came up with. So it'll be interesting to hear other perspectives as well.
Terrific. So that's session 2A, 9:45 time slot in the Streeterville Ballroom. We'll bring the mic right back this side. I'll get out of your way.
Well, good morning. My name is Tara Wiedemann. I'm the Senior Director for Education and Organizational Development at Cardiovascular Clinic. And myself and Jeannie Armour-Trout in the back, wave Jeannie. She and I will be co-presenting this morning on strategic partnerships and how to use those strategic partnerships as a way to develop your current workforce and your workforce of the future. So she and I will be talking a little about Carillion's journey and the path that we've taken and where we have arrived. So please join us this morning.
Terrific. And so once again, that is session 2B. That will be beginning at 10:20 in the Streeterville Ballroom. So the only person that we're missing, all right, perfect. Just in time.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dörte Heimbeck. I'm the Senior Leadership Advisor and Coach with Moffitt Cancer Center. I'm going to speak about the journey that Moffitt took in driving their engagement from the bottom quartile, 12th, 19th percentile, back up to 89. That was a 5-year journey, and what I'm sharing are fairly specific strategies and tactics that we employed and sharing with you how that worked out.
Awesome. And that's session 1B, 10:20 in the Avenue Ballroom. Thank you so much. So we have an absolutely incredible slate of presenters for that session, what we've described as the power sessions. These are quick-hitting, very important topics that you get the opportunity to choose which direction you'd like to go. So thank you to all of you, and we'll begin that shortly. So just a couple of housekeeping items. Once again, a reminder to fill out the orange evaluation forms if you've not done so already. Again, this is how we get the valuable feedback to build next year's agenda and make it as impactful as this year's has been. Once again, there is a QR code on there if you prefer to do that from your mobile device. And then in addition to that, I do want to just call out, if you have not done so already, please pick up a copy of Dr. Richard Boyas's new book, Helping People Change, Coaching with Compassion for Lifelong Learning and Growth, during the break this morning. So we're going to take a break. Please feel free to use the time to network, check out if you need, and we'll be back here at 9:45. Thank you.